I always thought I'd leave Apex Shield Systems on my own terms, on the day I felt ready to close the chapter on a 30-year career. I never imagined that moment would arrive like this, in an era where being 53 somehow makes you a liability in tech. I was used to being called the veteran, the keeper of the flame, the unofficial mentor for every new class of engineers. What I wasn't used to was being treated like outdated software someone couldn't wait to uninstall. I joined Apex Shield at 26, back when the company was renting a cheap commercial building on the south side of Austin. There were only 16 of us then, and 3 aging servers that ran hot enough to fry an egg. I lived through every system overhaul, every brutal contract, every frozen night spent in the server room. I went so deep into cybersecurity that every pathway inside the Aegis 9 encryption system felt like my own bloodstream. And yet here I was, sitting in my office, staring out at rows of brand new engineer desks flown in from Silicon Valley, feeling like a stranger inside the place I helped build. The young faces were confident, fast talking, fluent in trendy jargon that took me a few seconds to decode. They were talented, no doubt, but there was also a quiet coldness in the air. Their eyes slid past me, the way someone glances at a company museum exhibit. Something important once, but not part of the future. The only person who made the room easier to breathe was Ryan Torres. Ryan was 27, but unlike most, he understood that technology wasn't just about shiny new frameworks and whatever optimization philosophy the internet was selling that week. He respected experience. He asked about the logic inside Aegis 9, about why I built each layer of encryption the way I did. I didn't see him as a successor, but sometimes I wondered if he might become one of the few who understood the system from its roots. One afternoon, while I was reviewing an internal report, Ryan rolled his chair beside my desk. His voice dropped low, cautious, as if he worried someone else might hear. "Evelyn, they're talking about restructuring on the 9th floor. I don't think you were invited." I looked up. His eyes were full of concern, the kind a loyal dog gets when it senses danger before its owner does. I tried to joke to break the tension. "You think they're pushing me out?" Ryan shrugged, but didn't smile. "I think they want to refresh the team. And they'll probably start with the higher salaries." I knew what he meant. I was in that group, high pay, high age. The combination young leadership often sees as dead weight. But I stayed quiet. I didn't want Ryan to see even a flicker of worry. Then the day came to introduce the new chief executive officer. Lena Mercer walked in wearing a pale gray suit, carrying the confidence of someone who'd lived her whole life on a stage. I watched her from the second row. She was sharp, charismatic, the kind of person who could quiet a room without raising her voice. But in her eyes, I saw something else: ambition. Not the kind that builds, but the kind that clears the ground so only one name is left standing. Her speech was polished. Speed, reinvention, innovation, youth. She talked about pushing Apex Shield into a new age of artificial intelligence and automation. All good things. But she never, not once, mentioned Aegis 9. No nod to the system that kept us alive through Department of Defense audits. No acknowledgement of the people who built the foundation she was standing on. I wasn't angry, but something inside me cracked a little wider. After the event, Lena launched a series of strategy meetings. I waited for an email invitation, but none came. By the third meeting, I realized this wasn't an oversight. I was being cut out of decisions I had shaped for the past 20 years. One morning, Ryan came to my office, hesitant. I walked past the strategy room today. They had a slide up with staff lists. Some roles were marked, and everyone marked was over 50. I looked at him, and in that moment, I understood something was coming. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. Like a storm gathering at the edge of the horizon. You can't stop it. You can only brace yourself. I smiled at Ryan, though even I wasn't sure if it was meant to reassure him or myself. Just focus on doing your best. I'll handle the rest. But after he left, I sat alone for a long time. The neon lights above reflected my face in the dark monitor, every line, every sleepless night etched into the glass. It felt like the place I had built no longer recognized me, and I knew something was about to change forever. Maybe if you're listening to this, you felt it too. That moment when the world you gave your heart to suddenly turns its back. I'd really like to know where you're hearing this from. your office, your commute home, or a sleepless night like the one I lived through. Leave a comment, because sometimes the right story at the right moment reminds us we're not alone. And if you follow stories where calm and intellect are the sharpest weapons, stay with this one, because what happens next is worth hearing. That morning, I arrived early as I always did. The coffee on my desk was still hot when a young HR staffer appeared at my door, knocking softly before stepping inside with a nervous look he couldn't quite hide. Evelyn, the chief executive officer, wants to see you in her ninth floor office. Immediately. The way he emphasized the word immediately told me this wasn't a friendly check-in. I stood, closed my laptop, and stepped out of my office with a slow breath. I couldn't tell was worried or simply the confirmation of something I had long expected. The ninth floor of Apex Shield was always colder than the rest, a kind of cold created not by air conditioning, but by power. Lena's glass corner office overlooked the whole of downtown Austin. The door was half open, as if someone had entered but didn't dare close it. I tapped lightly on the doorframe, but Lena didn't turn around. She stood with her arms crossed, watching the traffic below like the city belonged to her. "Come in," she said, her voice steady enough to make me think she had rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror the night before. I sat in the chair across from her desk. The white light pouring through the glass wall washed over my face, making me feel fully exposed. "I'll be direct so we can save each other time." Lena sat down, fingers interlocked with confident precision. Apex Shield is changing fast. We need people who match that pace, who are adaptable, agile, and aligned with a younger mindset. You were essential to the previous era, but at this stage, you no longer fit the direction of renewal. I heard every word clearly. Not a fit. Renewal. Organizational optimization. Words crafted to avoid lawsuits, but sharp enough to sever a decades-long career in a single breath. Lena continued as if eager to wrap things up. "This is a strategic decision, not a personal one. I trust you understand." I looked at her for a long time. Maybe if she had shown even a hint of regret, I would have felt something softer. But there was nothing. Only the calm, icy expression of someone who had just won a match. Their opponent never knew they were playing. She slid a folder across the desk. "These are the termination papers, your standard support package, and a list of items you need to hand over. Your system access will be disabled in 5 minutes per internal security rules." I didn't even have time to react before the back door opened. 2 security staff stepped inside. They didn't touch me, but their presence made it clear the company didn't want me to have even a second to process what I was losing. I stood. Lena leaned back, her tone light, almost businesslike. "Thank you for your contributions. I wish you the very best." I didn't answer. I walked out of that office as if leaving a courtroom where the verdict had been decided long before I arrived. The ninth floor hallway was long and silent, my footsteps echoing in a way that felt too loud. By the time I pressed the elevator button to return to my floor, my chest felt strangely hollow. Not angry, not hurt, just the quiet realization of something I had known deep down. I no longer fit the future they were painting. When I stepped back into the engineering department, the room stiffened with heavy silence. A few people glanced at me, then immediately looked away. Spaces once filled with chatter now felt like empty corridors. Ryan stood a few feet away, face pale. I gave a slight shake of my head, signaling him not to come over. I didn't want his loyalty mistaken for defiance. I returned to my office. The door closed behind me, leaving me alone with a room that held nearly my entire life. My desk sat by the window, the spot where I'd spent thousands of hours building line after line of Aegis 9. Now, that desk held only a few small things: a framed photo of our first engineering team, an old coffee mug, and 2 notebooks filled with encryption notes. My laptop was already locked. The black screen displayed a single line: "Account no longer active." I packed everything into the small cardboard box security had handed me. Each item was light, but placing them inside felt like gathering the remnants of a youth someone had decided was no longer useful. I looked around the room one last time. Everything was so familiar I could have described it with my eyes closed. But today it felt foreign, like I was standing in someone else's space. I carried the box into the hallway. No one said a word. I walked past familiar faces whose eyes had turned into closed windows, unwilling to be caught in the story unfolding around me. I didn't blame them. Silence was a survival skill here. I stepped outside the building. The Austin sun hit me hard, hot enough to make me squint. I stood there for a few seconds, holding the small box, staring at the Apex Shield logo on the front of the building, the way you look at a house you once called home, now slammed shut. 26 years of loyalty, and this was how it ended. No proper explanation, no chance to speak, just a cold morning, a folder, and a door closing behind me. I knew that as I walked away from the building that day, I had lost everything in their eyes. But what they didn't know was that in that exact moment, they had triggered something they would soon pay for. I drove home in silence. Austin was as loud as ever, but the noise felt sealed outside the car windows. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, slow and steady, as if my body was trying to keep me from collapsing. When I walked through the door, Rex, my old dog, ran up wagging his tail. But after a moment, he tilted his head, studying me with that worried look animals save for the things humans try to hide. I set the small box on the kitchen counter, took off my shoes, and stood there for a long moment like someone who had just walked out of a strong wind. I didn't need a mirror to know how exhausted I looked, but instead of sitting down, I opened the wooden cabinet at the end of the hallway. The hinges creaked, dry and old, as if untouched for years. In the back corner was a silver metal box, scratched and cold to the touch. The box I always knew I would eventually have to open again. I carried it to the dining table, set it down, and took a long breath before lifting the lid. Inside were documents most people would have forgotten after 20 years. But I wasn't most people. On top was a thick envelope with a familiar name written across the front: Mark Ramsey. Mark was a friend from the days when Apex Shield was nothing more than a tiny startup crammed inside a converted garage. He was a young attorney then, fresh to his own practice, but sharp when it came to intellectual property law. We used to sit in a cheap bar near the office and talk about the company's future, back when Aegis was still a pile of rough code. Mark had always been the realist between us. I opened the envelope. Inside was a copy of the provisional copyright filing for Aegis 9, stamped in March of 17 years ago. In the upper corner, under applicant, my name was printed clearly: Evelyn Hart. I remembered that night vividly. Mark had all but forced me to sign the filing. I was young then, loyal to a fault. I believed everything should belong to the company. I believed loyalty would be repaid. Mark saw the cracks long before I did. He once told me over the sticky bar counter that smelled like cheap beer, "Evelyn, the company is too unstable right now. Too many risks, too many legal blind spots. Keep the provisional rights under your name. You can transfer them later when everything is stable. Protect yourself before someone decides your voice no longer matters in the thing you built." I had laughed, thinking he was overreacting. But in the end, I listened. I trusted his caution. And strangely enough, that temporary decision had slept quietly for 17 years, like a forgotten seed buried in the ground. I opened the second document. A small addendum, neat and sharp like a thin blade. The reversion clause. The one Mark drafted himself and insisted I sign, even when I didn't fully understand its weight. The clause stated plainly: in the event that Evelyn Hart is terminated from employment without just cause, all ownership and usage rights associated with the Aegis 9 patent will automatically revert to Evelyn Hart 24 hours after termination. I read the words again and again. No loopholes, no conditions, no vague phrasing. Mark had written it with absolute clarity. An Apex Shield, through years of leadership turnover, shifting priorities, and endless promises to finalize the transfer later, had never completed the legal process of moving ownership from my name to the company. The back of my neck warmed, not with anger, but with the sudden understanding of what I had suspected from the moment Lena fired me. She had accidentally triggered a legal mechanism the company had forgotten. A bomb planted 17 years ago, and today they pressed the button themselves. I stood, gathered the documents, and walked straight to my small home office. I turned on my personal computer, adjusted the lighting, opened my email, and drafted a message to Mark. I attached photos of the documents and wrote only a few lines. "Mark, please review the clause. I was terminated this morning. No reason, no warning. If the clause is still valid, I need to know immediately. My hand lingered on the mouse before clicking send. Maybe because I knew this moment opened a door I could never close again, a path I never imagined walking. But when you are pushed out and erased by the very thing you helped build, silence stops being an option. I leaned back, letting my shoulders drop. In the quiet of the room, I could almost hear the kitchen clock counting each second. Every beat, a step closer to something Apex Shield never saw coming. They thought I would walk away defeated, but they didn't know that for 17 years, I had kept the most important part of the company in my own hands. They didn't know that the patent they were using to build the future of Apex Shield didn't belong to them at all. And this morning, by firing me without cause, Lena Mercer had just activated a counterstrike she never anticipated. I stared at the dark computer screen, feeling the future shift. No longer foggy the way it was when I left the building, but sharp, focused, and entirely in my control. My phone buzzed less than 10 minutes after I sent the email. I did not have to check the screen. I already knew who was calling. Mark had always been the kind of person who responded fast when something felt serious. I answered before the second ring finished. His voice came through steady, focused in that familiar way only a lawyer who has handled far too many difficult cases can sound. Evelyn, tell me exactly what happened this morning. I walked him through everything. No embellishments, no dramatic pauses. Mark stayed quiet the entire time, letting out a low breath only when I mentioned losing access after 5 minutes, or when I described how Lena hid the truth behind polished corporate language meant to sanitize the removal of a long-standing employee. When I finished, Mark spoke immediately. They terminated you without offering any concrete reason. No report, no violation, no warning. That means the clause is still active, and if I remember correctly, it triggers within 24 hours. Which means Aegis 9 belongs to me. I finished for him. There was a brief silence. Then Mark lowered his voice. Evelyn, do you understand how big this is? Aegis 9 is the backbone of 5 major contracts with the Department of Defense: the tech, the applied systems, the integrated software, worth roughly $750 million. If ownership reverts to you, Apex Shield will not be able to operate any version going forward. They know that. I closed my eyes. I had imagined this possibility before, but hearing Mark speak it out loud made it sharper, more real. It did not feel like a victory. It felt like stepping into a territory no one ever wants to enter, but one I had to walk into to protect myself. Mark continued, what you need to do now is file the activation notice with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. They will check the original paperwork, verify your termination date, and update the ownership. Do you want me to help with the filing? I opened my eyes and looked at the stack of documents in front of me. That old feeling returned, steady and familiar, the same feeling I had the first time I wrote the core lines of Aegis 9. I shook my head, even though Mark could not see it. No, I can do it myself. I heard him chuckle softly. All right. But message me once it is sent. They will not be able to respond in time, but I want to be sure everything is done in the right order. After the call ended, I sat in silence for a moment. Not to consider whether I should do it, but simply to let my emotions settle. I was not doing this for revenge. I had nothing to prove to Lena or to Apex Shield. I was simply restoring something they had carelessly dismissed, and now they would bear the consequences of that disregard. I turned on my computer. The pale blue glow reflected off my face, making me look calmer than I felt. I opened the USPTO site and logged in with the personal account I had not touched in years. I still remember the password. I was not sure why. Maybe because some part of me had never truly stepped away from my responsibility to Aegis 9. The filing interface was still as simple as I remembered. I pulled the documents closer, opened in the attachment section, and began uploading each page. I entered the original filing code, typed the patent number in full, and selected the notice of ownership change. It did not take long, but I moved carefully, checking every word. When I reached the section asking for the reason behind the ownership update, I paused. The drop-down list was short, and on the third line was exactly what I needed. Termination of employment without just cause under a previously filed clause. I selected it, then signed electronically. My signature appeared in the top right corner of the screen, small and neat, yet carrying the weight of 26 years condensed into a single stroke. A window popped up confirming that the filing had been submitted and was pending review by a USPTO officer. From this moment on, everything was already in motion, and Apex Shield had no idea. I leaned back in my chair, letting my shoulders relax, and felt a strange kind of quiet settle around me. Not the quiet after a storm, but the quiet before the real one begins. I did not feel triumphant or thrilled. What I felt was balance, as if the world had just shifted back into its proper place. I looked at the clock. The second hand moved steadily. Within the next 24 hours, the USPTO would process the update. When that happened, every legal system tied to Aegis 9 would list my name. And Apex Shield, the company that sent me away like an outdated tool, would walk straight into a crisis they did not know they had created. I switched off the computer and stood. My small house was dim and peaceful, so different from the bright glass floors at Apex Shield. I turned off the office light, closed the door, and stood in the hallway for a few seconds, letting my eyes adjust to the dark. Something in that darkness felt comforting, like it was shielding me until the outside world caught up to what was unfolding. I walked to the living room where Rex had fallen asleep. He lifted his head, his warm brown eyes quietly asking if I was ready for whatever came next. I did not answer. I just sat beside him and rested my hand on his head. Outside, the evening was settling in. The city was still loud, still cold, still hurried. But inside, my home, everything was still, as if the entire world was holding its breath. It was just me now, and a truth that could not be undone. Just me and an encryption system worth $750 million. And just me, the person Apex Shield thought they had pushed out of the game. But the game was still going, and they had just handed me the strongest piece on the board. The next morning, just as I finished brewing my second cup of coffee, my phone lit up with an email from Mark. He kept it short. USPTO has received the filing. The process is running. I nodded to myself. Everything was out of my hands now. The gears were turning somewhere else, somewhere Apex Shield had no idea the first tremor had already begun. At that same moment inside Apex Shield headquarters, something seemingly small but deeply fateful was happening. On the 10th floor, in an office washed in harsh white light, a legal intern named Jacob was cross-checking old patents as part of a routine assignment. He only wanted to finish quickly so he could get home in time for the basketball game that night. But when he typed the filing number for Aegis 9 into the USPTO system, he froze. The owner listed on the screen was not Apex Shield Systems, like every other time. It read clearly, Evelyn Hart. Jacob blinked several times, convinced he had misread it. He checked the filing code again, refreshed the page 3 times, then tried a different computer. The result was the same. The company's most critical patent had changed ownership. His hands trembled slightly. Jacob knew enough law to understand how serious this was, but he also knew something else. If he reported it to the wrong person, he might be the one shown the door instead of being praised, so he chose the safest option. He forwarded it to the head of legal, Mrs. Walker. Walker opened the email just as she stepped into an HR meeting. She glanced at the attached file, then immediately stood up and walked out, abandoning the meeting without a word. She headed straight to the chief executive officer's office, knocked twice, and entered without waiting. Lena was standing in front of the digital board, mapping out a product launch timeline with her usual polished confidence. Walker placed the printed query result on the desk. The Aegis 9 patent has just updated its owner. It no longer belongs to the company. Lena glanced at the page and let out a short, cold laugh. System glitch. USPTO often mislabels things when reprocessing old filings. I have seen it before. Walker shook her head. This is not a glitch. The update is verified with a valid signature, and the effective date is yesterday, one day after you terminated Evelyn. Lena straightened, her eyes narrowing like a thin blade. She did not speak for several seconds. She simply gathered the papers as if wanting to erase their existence. Then she spoke slowly, her voice low. Do not inform the board. Walker stayed silent. Lena walked around the desk and stopped at the tall window, staring down at the city. She was calculating. Not panicking, not afraid. Calculating. A person like Lena did not accept defeat easily. I had known that from the first day I saw that ambitious spark in her eyes. "Mrs. Walker," Lena said while still looking out the window, "find me a top-tier law firm. Someone sharp enough to slip through any loophole in that clause, and tell them to prove Evelyn left voluntarily." But Walker answered immediately, without hesitation. "The timeline does not match. Internal records show Evelyn was called up and forced to hand everything over on the same day. No notice, no request for explanation, no documentation. Everything indicates an unjustified termination." Lena turned, revealing two rare words: "Enough." Walker understood and left the room. As the door closed, Lena pulled out her phone, called someone, and lowered her voice. "I need to see you, just the two of us. No conference room, no assistants." She was calling a long-standing board member, one who had backed her appointment. For years, he had been the shield for her most questionable decisions, and now she intended to pull him into the fallout with her. They met in a small private lounge. Lena told the story in the way most favorable to herself, that this was a legal fluke. Evelyn was exploiting an outdated clause to hurt the company. To keep her seat and protect the company's image with the Department of Defense, the board needed to keep this quiet. She proposed a strategy that sounded firm, but was laced with risk. Accelerate corporate restructuring to demonstrate strong leadership. Remove the old legal department and empower the new executive circle. And above all, maintain absolute secrecy about the ownership change of Aegis 9. He thought for a long moment, then gave a reluctant nod. Lena understood instantly. He would not oppose her, at least not yet. Meanwhile, Ryan, on his way to the 8th floor to deliver a system report, walked past a small executive meeting room. The door was slightly ajar. He heard Evelyn's name repeated, along with the phrase, "We have to control this before the board finds out." He froze, holding his breath for a few seconds, then forced himself to walk on. But he knew. Something massive was being buried. The suspicion followed him the entire day. In the eyes of middle managers, he saw tension, dread, and the fear of getting dragged into a scandal they did not understand. High-priority tags marked internal emails. Conference rooms stayed locked from morning to evening. People avoided each other's gaze in the hallways. Apex Shield, the company everyone once believed was as solid as steel, was beginning to shake from within. And at the center of that tremor was something they refused to name: Evelyn Hart. They did not know the reversion clause had already activated. They did not know that every plan Lena made to bend the law was built on sinking ground. They did not know each passing minute was bringing them closer to crisis. But they all felt one thing, even if no one dared say it. Apex Shield was holding a ticking bomb, and they had no idea who planted it or when it would go off. Only I knew. And time was still moving. The Apex Shield demo took place on a morning when everything felt overly prepared. Vehicles from the Department of Defense lined up in front of the main entrance. The media team scattered across the lobby with cameras and notebooks. The company logo glowed on every screen, accompanied by the words, "Aegis 9, the future of military security." From the outside, Apex Shield looked ready to enter a new golden era. The 14th floor had been transformed into a sleek conference hall. The front row belonged to the Department of Defense delegation. Behind them sat major defense contractors, media representatives, and a handful of VIP partners. Expensive perfume mixed with low conversation, giving the hall an air of confidence and promise. Behind the stage, Lena stood among the senior executives. She wore a dark, tailored suit, her face polished to perfection, as if made for moments like this. No one looking at her would imagine she was hiding a secret capable of destroying the company. She smiled with practiced confidence before stepping onto the stage, still believing everything was under control. Ryan sat at the technical station near the back, surrounded by monitors. All morning, he had sensed something was wrong. Closed-door meetings, pale faces in the legal department, a stream of high-priority internal emails. He did not know what was happening, but he knew this was not an ordinary demo day. At exactly 9 in the morning, the lights dimmed. Lena stepped onto the stage to polite, restrained applause. Her voice rolled out smooth and flawless, as if she had rehearsed it hundreds of times. She spoke about the new strategy, Apex Shield's vision for the digital security era, and finally arrived at the highlight. Aegis 9, the encryption system she described as entirely owned and developed in-house by Apex Shield. Slide after slide transitioned until the most critical part appeared, the core encryption architecture of Aegis 9. As Lena tapped the button to launch the simulation, the massive LED screen froze. Not a simple glitch. It stopped at the most sensitive moment. Lena forced a smile and gestured to the technicians. Ryan bent over the console, but when he saw the error notification, his heart dropped. It was not a software bug. It was a display block triggered by a change in patent ownership. Before Lena could react, a man in a black suit from the Department of Defense delegation stood up. He was their legal advisor, known for being direct and unforgiving. His voice carried clearly across the hall. Why does the USPTO record show that the Aegis 9 patent is owned by Evelyn Hart and not Apex Shield? For several seconds, no one breathed. Chairs shifted with a sharp metallic scrape like a blade hitting the floor. Lena stood frozen, speechless. Her confident expression drained of color. The advisor held up a printed packet, a full USPTO lookup. My name was there, large and unmistakable. Below it was the effective timestamp. 24 hours after my termination. Ryan felt a chill crawl up his spine. He knew Evelyn was not someone who acted without reason. If her name was there, she had every right to be, and everyone in that room understood instantly that the system they were about to demonstrate could now be considered legally compromised. While Lena struggled to regain control, the next blow landed even faster. A tech journalist in the third row lifted his tablet. He raised it so the entire hall could see. I just received leaked files from inside Apex Shield, he announced. This is an internal legal warning that the patent ownership has changed, and this is the Chief Executive Officer's directive. Do not inform the board. The room erupted into frantic whispers, sharp and spreading like a wave. Officials from the Department of Defense stood up immediately. Some did not wait for Lena to respond. They walked out. Contractors leaned into their assistance, whispering rapidly, then followed. No one wanted to be tied to a legal scandal in front of the Department of Defense. Lena tried to salvage the moment. She talked about system errors, about data migration, and about Evelyn's lack of involvement in the recent development. But with each word, her voice weakened. Every excuse sliced deeper into her already crumbling image. A Department of Defense official stared at her for a long moment before speaking slowly. We cannot continue this discussion while the intellectual property status is unclear. This demonstration ends now. They left the hall, leaving Lena alone under the bright spotlight like a verdict. Executives rushed in to help her off stage. The demo collapsed into a silent chaos, the kind of silence more devastating than shouting. That afternoon, the board convened an emergency meeting. No press, no executives. Only the highest powers at Apex Shield were seated around the table, reading page after page of documents they should have known about days earlier. I was not there, but I knew exactly how they looked at one another. The realization that they were standing on fractured ground, the understanding that it all began the moment Lena ordered the truth to be buried. The demo had imploded, the trust of the Department of Defense had fractured, the company's reputation was shattered in front of hundreds of witnesses, and Apex Shield finally understood the truth they had ignored for years. They had destroyed something priceless. Not because I left, but because they never valued me in the first place. News of the failed demo spread across Austin within a few hours. When I woke up the next morning, my phone screen was flooded with notifications. 10 minutes after the market opened, Apex Shield stock had dropped nearly 30%. Financial analysts pushed the company into the high-risk category for intellectual property instability. Online headlines blazed red. Tech forums buzzed like a hive struck with a stick. Among the dozens of headlines, one stopped me cold for a moment. The Department of Defense suspends its contract with Apex Shield, pending verification of Aegis ownership. I did not need to read further. I knew Apex Shield had entered a crisis unlike anything it had faced before. Inside the building, the tension was so thick that Ryan later told me it felt as if everyone was walking on shattered glass. Emergency meetings erupted one after another. The legal department was summoned and interrogated by the board. Walker, the head of legal, ultimately admitted they had warned the chief executive officer about the patent issue 3 days prior, but Lena gave a direct order not to report it upward. The board had no patience left after hearing that. Faces that usually stayed neutral hardened with suspicion and anger. Lena tried to hold her ground. When she was called into the main boardroom, she carried herself as if everything was still under her control. She addressed the entire board. Evelyn worked here for 26 years. Under our intellectual property rules, all work created during that time belongs to the company. The Aegis 9 patent is Apex Shield property and cannot revert to her because of a flimsy clause. She spoke as if she could still shape the narrative, but no one in the room believed her anymore. One board member asked coldly, "Then why do internal records show that the transfer was never completed?" Lena did not answer immediately. Her eyes flickered for a moment, but she forced herself back into composure and said it was a delay, something that could be resolved legally. Just then, the head of legal's phone vibrated. Walker checked the email, asked permission to open it, and a few seconds later turned to the board, her voice far more solemn. "This is a response from Evelyn Hart's attorney." The entire room went silent. Walker cast the document onto the large screen. The title appeared clearly: Legal Status of Aegis 9, Confirmation of the Reversion Clause. Then came the attachments from Mark, crisp and thorough. A full copy of the provisional filing under my name from 17 years ago. A legally valid reversion clause, signed and notarized. A series of emails, drafts, and documents showing that the final transfer had been stalled for years by executive delays, with no completed paperwork. The governing rules on personal patent rights apply when a transfer is not finalized. And the strongest blow of all, the USPTO confirmation showing the effective date, exactly 24 hours after my termination. A board member spoke under his breath. "This is entirely lawful." They triggered the reversal themselves. I was not in the room, but Ryan later told me the atmosphere felt like watching an entire building collapse. Lena tried to counter it, claiming the clause was outdated, claiming I had not contributed to newer encryption versions, and claiming the clause conflicted with employment law. But the board had finished listening. They saw clearly that Lena had ignored legal warnings and ordered a cover-up to protect her position. The final blow came from somewhere Lena never expected. In the middle of the meeting, the board secretary received an anonymous internal email. The sender identified himself as an engineer and revealed that Lena had pressured staff to stay silent and instructed data edits in internal reports to preserve her image before the board. Ryan was the one who sent that email. He knew using his name could cost him his job or worse, but he also knew that if he said nothing, Apex Shield would continue running toward a cliff for the sake of one person. The board read the email, and every face changed. Lena realized she had just lost something even more essential than authority. She had lost the trust of her own people. She tried to stand and speak, but the board chair cut her off, his voice so cold the room fell still. "Enough, Lena. The board will deliberate privately. Wait outside." The door closed behind her. No footsteps, no whispers, only a silence heavy as metal. Ryan said that when Lena stepped into the hallway, employees avoided her eyes. No one approached. No one asked if she was all right. No one offered comfort. Her entire facade of leadership had fallen in a matter of hours, and now she stood alone in a long corridor, hearing the muffled scrape of chairs behind the conference room door. At the same time, I sat in my home office. I did not know the exact details of what was happening in that boardroom, but my phone kept buzzing. A message from Mark. "They will have to contact you. Get ready." Not long after, my phone rang. I looked at the screen, the Apex Shield switchboard number. I answered. The voice of a board member came through, tightly controlled, but full of strain. "Evelyn Hart, we need to negotiate with you, immediately." I leaned back slightly, looking out at the sunlight pouring across the room, and I knew that after everything they had done, they finally understood something. They should have realized years ago. I was no longer an employee they could dismiss on a cold morning. I was the only person who could decide the future of Apex Shield. I returned to Apex Shield the next afternoon when the building was still in chaos after the disastrous demo. From the outside, the headquarters looked just as sleek and modern as ever, but the air in the lobby felt different. A tension hung there like invisible smoke. Employees walked faster than usual, avoiding eye contact with each other and with strangers. Mark was waiting for me near the reception. He gave a small nod, the calm expression of a lawyer who had weathered too many high-pressure negotiations. "Ready?" he asked. I gave him a faint smile. "I have been ready since the moment they pushed me out of here." We stepped into the elevator and headed straight to the 16th floor, the largest boardroom in the company. I had once presented dozens of major projects in that room. Today, it was an arena. When the doors opened, 12 board members were already seated. They watched us with grave expressions. None of the usual arrogance that often came with tech leadership. The crisis had stripped that confidence away. At the far end of the table sat Lena. She was no longer at the center, no longer in charge. In front of her sat two attorneys from Luxton and Hyde, hired in a panic the night before. Her hair was neatly combed, her makeup heavy enough to hide exhaustion, but her eyes betrayed her. The board chair invited me to sit. His voice was measured. "Thank you for coming, Evelyn. We want to resolve this as quickly and fairly as possible." I met his eyes. I knew exactly what quickly meant. The company was bleeding money. And fairly meant do not take us to court. I placed the documents on the table. Before we begin, let me be clear. I have every legal basis to reclaim full ownership of Aegis 9 and force Apex Shield to halt all deployment, but I do not want to destroy the company I helped build. So here are my terms. The room fell silent as I opened the folder. First term, Apex Shield will pay me $20 million up front, not a cent less. A few people flinched, but I continued. Second term, I receive 10% in long-term royalties for every version of Aegis 9, including all future upgrades, Mark added gently. This is fully compliant with federal intellectual property law. We have more than 20 precedent filings. I nodded and moved on. Third term, I take a seat on the board with full voting rights, not an honorary title. I want my voice to carry weight in the company's future. Several members exchanged uneasy looks. They did not like that term, but they did not speak. Fourth term, a formal public statement from Apex Shield acknowledging me as the sole creator of Aegis 9. No collective contribution claims, no revisionist history, no ambiguity. I paused and looked directly at Lena. Fifth term, Chief Executive Officer Lena Mercer will resign immediately. No one looked surprised, but Lena's face lost all color, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her attorneys touched her sleeve, signaling her to stay calm. And finally, the sixth term. Apex Shield will create a fund supporting women over 45 in the tech industry. I want those who were once deemed no longer fit to have another path forward. When I finished, the room sank into a deep silence. Mark opened his laptop, ready to project documents if needed. But no one asked for anything yet. They were weighing, calculating, and afraid all at once. Then the arguments began. One member protested the $20 million. Another questioned the board seat. Another hesitated at removing the chief executive officer during a volatile period. But Mark countered each point with legal evidence they could not dismiss. The provisional filing from 17 years ago, the legally binding reversion clause, fully signed and notarized. Internal emails proving the transfer was delayed by the executive team, not by me. USPTO confirmation of the completed ownership reversal. Lena's negligence and her attempts to conceal the truth. Each argument from Mark landed like a sharpened blade, precise, concise, and impossible to dodge. The board debated for nearly 3 hours. Lena tried repeatedly to interject, claiming that Evelyn was no longer involved in the updated architecture, that the technology had evolved, and that default ownership belonged to the company. But every word only damaged her further. They no longer believed her. Finally, the board chair rose. He looked around at each member and delivered the decision. We have agreed to accept all of Evelyn Hart's terms. I saw Lena freeze, her eyes blinking rapidly as if refusing to understand. One of her attorneys leaned over and whispered to her, Lena's head lowered, her shoulders trembling slightly. Then came the final pronouncement, sealing her fate. Lena Mercer will step down as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. No objections, no support, no farewells. Lena stood, gathered her documents, and tried to maintain poise, even as the truth settled over her like a weight. She walked out without a word, leaving the door to the boardroom to close behind her with a heavy thud. The same kind of door that once closed behind me, the morning they fired me. But this time, I was not the one being pushed out. I was the one deciding Apex Shield's future. I returned to Apex Shield once more, but this time everything was different. The large glass doors did not swing open to send me out into the street like on that fateful morning. They opened to welcome me back with a new title, member of the board of directors. No cardboard box in my arms, no pitying glances, no doubt in the air. Today, employees stepped aside in two neat lines as I walked through the lobby, an instinctive gesture reserved for those carrying real authority. I entered the elevator. Instead of pressing my old floor, my finger selected the 18th, the level reserved for the executive boardroom, a place I had never been allowed to set foot in before. When the doors opened, I stepped into a hallway lined with soft blue carpet and gentle lighting, a quiet world separated from everything below. A strange feeling washed over me. Not pride, just the simple realization that I had finally reached the place I should have been all along. Ryan was waiting outside the boardroom. When he saw me, his eyes brightened, though he still tried to stay professional. "Congratulations, Evelyn," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. I smiled. "Thank you, Ryan. People like you remind me why I fought." His face flushed, but for the first time since the morning I was fired, Ryan looked relieved. He knew justice had not been buried. And I knew he had been the first within the company to stand with me, even if only through an anonymous email. We stepped into the boardroom. The board members rose to greet me. The tension that had filled this room days earlier was gone. The Aegis 9 ownership issue had been resolved. Lena had disappeared quietly that same night. No press release, no announcement. Her name simply vanished from the leadership page the next morning. My first official meeting as a board member began with the most urgent matter: restructuring the engineering division. The board wanted my proposal. I did not hesitate. "We need transparency," I said. "No more leadership by intimidation. No more silencing employees. If we want Aegis 9 to grow stronger, we have to start with respect. Real respect." The room listened. I continued. "Establish an open reporting system where engineers can raise concerns without fear of retaliation. Create an independent core research unit that reports directly to the board. Build training and support programs for older engineers so experience is never dismissed as outdated. Focus on talent, not politics." When I finished, the board chair nodded slowly. "This is how real leadership builds value," he said. And for the first time, I felt genuine trust from them, not the empty handshakes of years past. Not long after the meeting, I received an email from the Department of Defense. A short, professional message, but powerful enough to make me exhale. "After reviewing the legal and ownership status of Aegis 9, we are officially reinstating the suspended contract. We look forward to continued collaboration." The largest door that had slammed in Apex Shield's face was open again, not because of an executive strategy, but because of the transparency I had brought back. That afternoon, I stood alone in the executive boardroom. The room was wide and still, the ceiling reflecting soft light. In front of me was the glass wall overlooking all of Austin, the city where I had worked, sacrificed, been betrayed, and then restored. Looking down at the moving cars, I did not feel revenge. No thrill of proving them wrong. No satisfaction in watching things fall apart. I felt justice. 26 years of work are no longer buried under cold phrases like resource optimization or not aligned with the new pace. No longer defined by a 53-year-old woman labeled outdated. No longer the story of someone pushed out like excess inventory. I had returned, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. A soft knock on the door. Ryan stood outside. "Do you want me to bring the documents for the new team?" he asked. I shook my head. "Tomorrow. Today, I just want to stand here." He nodded and closed the door. The room fell quiet again. I placed my hand on the polished table, the cool surface spreading across my fingertips, and I whispered to myself, a truth it took nearly 2 decades to reclaim. Aegis 9 was never Apex Shield's creation. It was my work, and I had just taken back the right to call it mine.